Good evening to everyone. So for the people who don't know me, my name is Nicolas MOREL. I am a senior creature modeler. I am actually working at Axis Studio in Glasgow. Before that, I worked a bit more than 1 year at MPC London on The Call of the Wild. There, I worked on 4 of the main dogs as a creature modeler. I did the model, the displacement, the key expressions, the facial expressions, sorry, the flex shapes as well, everything that involves the anatomy. I also worked on King Kong versus Godzilla as a concept modeler on a fighting sequence. And I also worked on Clifford the Big Red Dog, which is a movie coming in 2021. On the dog, I was an additional modeler, and on some other creatures, I was a key modeler. I then worked a bit more than 1 year at Warner Bros. There, I helped them develop their creature pipeline. I also worked on Godmothered, so an upcoming Christmas movie for Disney Plus. I think it's going to be on Disney Plus in the next few days. Together with one of us, we developed this little fella called Gary. So I did everything on it, the texturing, the modeling, sculpting, obviously, and as well as all the muscle simulation. And I was in charge of creating all his anatomy. And I also worked on another show, which unfortunately got cancelled, so I won't be able to mention it today. And tonight, following the recent release of my Bison modeling tutorial, I will share with you a bit of my workflow, and I will do this presentation about creatures in general. So I will speak about the importance of gathering references and how anatomy, analyzing and understanding anatomy helped me with my daily work. And then I will speak a bit about my workflow in general. So first thing, how I came to study anatomy. So a lot of people ask me this, how did I start? And it's a tough question because anatomy is such a wide and complex subject. It's always difficult to tell how you started it. So when I did a 3D school called ESMA in France, which probably you've heard it, which taught me how to be a very good 3D generalist. Unfortunately, what I was studying, we spent a very few time learning and studying anatomy because it just takes too much time. And so when I finished my studies, I've decided I want to become a creature modeler. So, but I didn't know anything about anatomy. So I just thought, okay, well, I have to talk myself about it. And I simply started working on one écorché. So I first did this lion écorché. It got a bit of success. So it kind of gave me a bit of a push to keep carrying on. Then I did this bison. Funny enough, it took me about 3 years to do the skin afterward. Then I wanted to go a bit away from realistic animals, and I took a concept from April Prime. She's an amazing concept artist, and I did this écorché of a Draco. And with these 3 first écorché I did, that was my first 3 creature work, and with them it allowed me to get my first 2 jobs as a creature modeler. So at the time I was in London, but I was working as a 3D generalist, not as a creature modeler. And with these 3 jobs, it got me my 2 first jobs as a creature modeler. So the first one is I worked for Ziva Dynamics. I helped them on the last model, which was the horse. And the second one is MPC London. So these 3 guys got me my job at MPC London. And after that, I wanted to kind of end this kind of chapter of my anatomy study with kind of a bigger project. So I decided to start working on a grizzly. And while I was working on it, I decided to push things a bit further. And I decided to do an anatomy breakdown of it. And so I started describing and doing each individual muscle one by one, and to kind of doing like putting like kind of learning what words I use. To be honest, I almost forgot everything, but at the time I kind of knew each individual use, but turned out I forgot almost about everything. And what I was doing it drastically improved how I will see anatomy. And among them, I learned, by the way, these anatomy studies are available for free on my ArtStation. So I've done a complete breakdown about all these muscles that you can feel free to use for any of your personal project. It can be useful, and I've tried to put like some strange angle, so you can use it as a good reference. And so back to this. And so from this, I learned two main things that I'm going to share with you tonight. The first one concerns the anatomy structure and the concept of general volume of a muscle and its origin and insertion. Let me show you. So we have these two pictures. The first one concerns, so it's both picture of a forearm. The first one is a cutted view at three different parts on a forearm. So the white part here is the bone, and the red thing are the muscle, and the outside, the skin. And this is the bone with, in red and blue, the origin and attachment of each individual muscle. So from these two pictures, the thing you can spot right away is that obviously the muscle attached to the bone. And even though a muscle have a shape, when you look at the global shape of a muscle, you kind of realize that it's kind of round. The mistake I've done so many times, and I see many people do as well, is that when we do a muscle, we tend to do it as if it was like a bodybuilder. So, like very big bulge and very muscular. And if myself, I did these mistakes many times. If I go back to my lion, for example, I thought, okay, every muscle had to be big and had to be like, like if it's powerful, he has to be big. But it's not like this. It's closer to something like this. So it's kind of thinner, and it's the overall shape. You have to think about it as it's not necessarily bulgy around each muscle. And the second thing, for the origin and insertion, I will come to it a bit later. But the second thing I'd like to show with this picture is that you can notice how the muscle gets thinner as you're getting closer to an extremity. For example, on your wrist, you have your forearm, which is a bit bigger. And as you get closer to your wrist, it gets thinner, and it gets thinner to the point where you can actually feel and see your bone. And those bone landmarks, so they exist on the wrists, on your feet, on your hips, and these bony landmarks are extremely useful when it comes to anatomy and building a creature using anatomy. So here, a fantastic sculpt by the artist Maria Paniflova. So she did this sculpt of a cat, and in red you can see what she calls the bony landmarks. And like I was saying a bit earlier, you can see that the bony landmarks are located around the extremities, so around the feet, front feet, rear feet, on the hip, around the shoulder, and on the face. Now, how can we use that with our references? You've all come across this kind of references. Actually, I'm going to show you, this is the pure ref of the bison I've been using. I will come back to it a bit later, but first of all, I would like to get your attention to the anatomy part. When we tend to see these references quite a lot, but at first I found them extremely difficult to understand. That 2D drawings, you don't really get the volume, even if you're like, like they tend to do like a nice representation. You don't really see, it's very difficult to understand, especially when you're not used to it. So but yet they're extremely useful because they give you a lot of information. So how can you use them? If I go back to this, for example, so I mentioned that you have the bony landmarks on the extremity. From this, if we take, for example, this picture of a ball, we have these extremities here. We can see the silhouette. The concept of silhouette is extremely important because it gives you so much information. Here you have, like, when you see the silhouette, you can see his wrist, and for example here you can see his hip. When you have a look at these 2D drawings, then you can see here that you have his hips, which is located here, and here that you have the wrist, which is located underneath. From that, what can we get? We can get, for example, if I go back to my pure ref, that we were located here. So here's the bone landmark, the hip, which is located here as well. And we have this bunch of muscle connecting from the hip to the end of the femur. Here's a 3D version I did. So you have two muscles connecting to it. You have the vastus lateralis, and the other one is called tensor facialis. And from this bony landmark, you can then identify these two muscles, and then you can understand that this big line here is actually located here. So basically, this bony landmark will give you hint of where you can find your anatomy, and if you are able to identify this anatomy, you will be more able to understand the reference you are using, and then be able to copy it more properly, because I find it very difficult to copy something that you don't understand. And you don't have to learn, obviously, the anatomy by heart, but if you have a knowledge of it, it's easier to spot it. Does this mean that you have to learn the anatomy of every animal you're walking on? Obviously not. Because if you take, for instance, this picture, we have a horse, we have a human, a cow, a dog. If you look at this, you can realize that their proportions are different. Their strengths and weakness are different as well. But in terms of anatomy, they're very similar. And you can use that. And the bony landmarks that we've seen in that example, in that example, can be found in any of these species. For example, you have your elbow, you can feel your hip, you can feel your shoulder, your bony landmark. So they present on every mammal. So instead of saying all the mammals are extremely different in many aspects, yes, true, but every mammal are similar into a lot of aspects too. And this can be used to your advantage. If you know about one animal, then it will be easier with the second one. And like everything, it comes with practice, but thankfully for anatomy, it gets easier. The second point concerns more the anatomy in motion and the concept of flexors and extensors, or how I like to call them, they are alive. By definition, a muscle is a band of fibrous tissue that has the ability to compress. You know, when you compress a muscle, it gets smaller in size, but it gets bigger in volume. And it also has the ability to extend. But in reality, this extension will be the result of a contraction of what we call an antagonist muscle. Let me give you an example of that, because I think I've lost a few of them here. Let's take, for example, the biceps, which is located here, and is antagonist muscle, the triceps. When you contract your biceps, you decrease the angle between the forearm and the shoulder. And when you extend your biceps, in reality, you are flexing your triceps, which is located underneath your arm, and the triceps increase the angle between your forearm and your shoulder. And we call these two antagonist muscles, the biceps, the flexor, and the triceps, the extensor. And flexors and and flexors and extensors are responsible for the entire motion of the body, of a human body, of any animal body. So here you have the foot extensors, the foot flexors, hip extensors, hip flexors on all the body. Now you're gonna tell me, how can we use that in anatomy? We don't need to learn that. We don't need to know it. That's true. But the fact that if you kind of are aware of it, it's gonna make your life easier in many ways. When you look at reference, when you are doing a creature, it's extremely rare that you find a reference in a neutral pose. They always in movement, but most of the time you're gonna start by doing it in neutral pose. And when you're gonna switch from one reference to another, it can be difficult to understand what it's from part of the anatomy and what's part from the movement. Let's take, for instance, these three references. The first one is a bison. Here you have like some very nice, skin details. You have like a big muscle, very nice. You can see it like very, very clearly. Here you have like a bison, which is kind of fighting. You have as well like the very hard light, makes the muscle very visible. Fantastic. Here, wow, a grizzly, for example, kind of animal, covered in fur, very difficult to see normally. Here it's wet, so you can actually see the anatomy. You have some nice wrinkle. You can see here's a triceps, deltoids, fantastic. But be careful with these kind of references. Here, the leg is moving forward. So you will have the skin that will get like a bit looser. If the leg is moving forward, then the muscle is getting contracted. Here, the muscle is completely tense because it's kind of moving forward. Here is getting out of the water. So you can see how the thig is moving forward, plus is bending his leg, is bending his forearm as well. So these wrinkles are probably due to that movement. What I want to show by that is having this idea of motion in mind helps you differentiate what's part of the anatomy and what's part of the movement. For example, how to understand this movement here. I was speaking a bit earlier about the thing of a cow. For example, you have the hip here and the femur. We go back to the anatomy. We kind of see the bony knock mark here and here. We can see it's leaning forward. Then when we go back to the reference, we have these two muscles, and we kind of guess that when a muscle is flexing, it gets smaller in size but bigger in volume. So that's why you have this big bulge here, because you have the vastus lateralis located here that is getting bigger. And obviously, the more you practice, the more you're gonna see it, but basically it helps you spot this kind of stuff and to understand it. And if you understand it, it's easier to copy it. And in fact, when I start a model, I always start by doing the anatomy, because it's just, for me, such a strong structure tool. It's just so it makes things much easier. It's, in this case, obviously, it's going to be covered in fur, but even though I still try to do my best to give the best version of the anatomy, because my take on that is, regardless of it, if it's going to be seen in the final result, you should always, just because of the people who are going to be working with you afterward, you should always try to get the best model you can. Because everyone will thank you after that. And especially when you're working on fantasy creatures, because fantasy creatures are one step further. So when you're copying an animal like the bison, you are copying something which is real. When you're doing a fantasy creature, you are doing something, you're not copying something that is real, but you are trying to copying something that could be real. It doesn't exist, but it needs to feel like it does, and it needs to feel like it could be real. You're trying to sell an idea. You're trying to sell that, yes, this creature could actually exist in another planet. Why not? With an elephant with two heads and a back made by a crocodile and a mix between a frog. And when it comes to this, it comes to my second point, which is references. And especially when you're doing fantastical creatures, you need references. You need to, obviously, you have like a first inspiration, which can be like completely crazy. But once you have it, you need to look realistic. You need to inspire yourself from actual reference. Anything, any creatures from any movie will be inspired in some way by something realistic. It can be an animal, it can be a rock, it can be a flower, it can be anything, but it has to be inspired by something. And so here, yeah, you can see all the references I've been using for this LFOs. And you can see that I've been dividing my kind of shapes in 3 sections. You have the global proportion, the secondary shape, and the colors, which is not like a third one. The third one should be like the tertiary shapes, which will be like the small skin pores and details. And for these two, to explain you a bit more about what I meant, let me switch back to the bison. So for the bison, I have like a bunch of references. So I've got like the main references for the skin. I've got obviously all the anatomy references. I've got some silhouette. The bison is a typical type of animal I have to deal with a lot at work, which is an animal completely covered in fur. And like I said, I always try to do the best anatomy I can, regardless of if it's going to be seen or not in the final render. But to do so, you have to be smart because you don't see it. And obviously, the anatomy is a huge help. So one thing you can do is actually, for the main reference, let me go back to this one. You have to have like some very few key references. For example, here I had 4. This reference gonna go with you alongside the project, and you're gonna go back to them all the time. It's just to make sure that you are following them. Obviously, when you're gonna do, some detail for the hooves, for the inner mouth, for the eyes, you're gonna take like a lot of references, but often you need to come back to your main reference to make sure you are getting it right and that you are getting the vibe you want to, because sometimes, you take like a reference. Oh, let's take this fantastic reference of a bull, and another bull, he has some very nice wrinkle. And before you know it, you've been copying it, and it no longer looks like a bison, but more like a bull. So you have to be careful. And when you go to this kind of references, so for example, if I go back to this Asian bull reference, what I meant by you have to get smart is you have to learn how to look at them. So I mentioned a bit earlier the concept of silhouette, which is extremely useful. So it's basically proportion. So like, for example, you can take the length between the 2 eyes compared to the height of the head. But one thing you can use as well is the concept of planes. What I mean by that, if you take this Anatomy for Sculptors example, which is a fantastic website, if you don't know it and you want to learn about mostly human anatomy, I definitely recommend it. It shows a very good example of what I call the plane on the head. So the global proportion should be the head, and this head is divided in many smaller planes and like simple forms. And it's extremely important that you are able to identify them and to rank them and to classify them into different rank. For instance, if you take the upper brow, you can see too many times, again, and even I've done it myself, when you start a model, you start doing the wrinkle very fast, and you're like some very nice alphas, and you start adding detail very quickly. But if your structure doesn't work, your final result won't work. And in order to, it's important to get these details, but it's secondary compared to this primary and secondary shape. That's what I didn't even mention the detail into the LFOs a bit earlier. So for instance, here, if I go and I show you my bison, and I take the upper eyelid, if I will switch to the secondary form, it will be 2 division, maybe 1 or 2. And you can see that you see these eyelids. And then if I go into division, I'm going to see the second one. But when you see the global shape of it, you don't really necessarily see it at first. And when you look at this one, you have the main eyelid, upper eyelid, and then inside this upper eyelid, you have like smaller one. And you need to be extremely careful about making sure your global shape works before starting to doing the smaller detail. On this face, you recognize it's a human even before you've put all the kind of smoothed angles and everything. So you need to make sure that you're getting this right. And again, I mentioned a bit earlier the bony landmarks, where we kind of know that here is a bony landmark, the cheek is a bony landmarks. And one thing I mentioned as well earlier was you have to be smart when you taking these kind of references. I mentioned that the grizzly was the first animal I did when I started. It was the first like kind of animal skin I did, and it was, for me, it was very difficult. I mean, I was walking every morning, like everyone told, like you have to walk daily. I was walking daily, but I wasn't getting anywhere. I was checking of my evolution, and from one session to another, it wasn't getting better, because the problem with a grizzly is that his face is completely covered in fur, and it's extremely difficult to understand. And at the time I was working at an MPC, and one day I was walking on a dog, and I kind of realized that there are some similarities. And I don't know if you remember a bit earlier, I've said that all the mammals are different in many ways, but we are similar in many others. What I meant by that is it came the idea to me to actually use a picture of a beagle, which is a dog breed. And because beagle, like, it's completely different from a grizzly, obviously, but it has some more characteristics. All the anatomy features are much more visible. And it really helped me, like if I was comparing the dog with the grizzly, it really helped me identifying, because the problem is, like, if you go back to this one, I couldn't even identify the anatomy features. And so I used this beagle as a reference, and instantly it got better. And my structure got more clear, and I was understanding it, as before I was kind of more guessing. But when you do that, always think, like I was telling you before, you always come back to your main reference to make sure that you're not getting away, obviously, from a grizzly, and that from a grizzly you're not starting to do a dog. And as well, you can use the silhouette. I mentioned the silhouette a bit earlier. If we go back to this picture, you have the primary form, which is going to be the wrist, and the secondary, which you can see if I do this small tool. Whoop. So if you have like the primary shape, which will be kind of more something like this, a bit exaggerated, and then the smaller shape should be a bit like you have like a bit form like this. But obviously this needs to be the main features, and this needs to be secondary. It's like all the small imperfection that's gonna make your model realistic. But this, you can't start doing this small imperfection before you've made sure that your main feature is done properly. And so that's about it, about the reference. And before I jump into my workflow, if anyone has any question so far, if anything like wasn't clear.
There's nothing in the Q&A yet, Nicolas. I mean, it's all very clear from my end.
Okay.
So thank you very much. I think it's been great so far.
Perfect.
Does anyone have any quick questions before Nicolas moves on to the next stage? Here we go. I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Maybe
sorry, there's just a quick question from Tiff Hall. She's just asking what was the anatomy website? I think you said Anatomy for Sculptors, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, Anatomy for Sculptors. I think they have as well, if I go back to ArtStation, I think they as well on ArtStation. Okay, my website doesn't work, but yeah, it's on ArtStation, it's Anatomy for Sculptors.
Yeah, cool. And then just a quick comment, Ali saying everything's clear and super interesting so far. Same from Janice, everything's clear, and from Jay as well. And Doug is asking, do you have any good sources for animal anatomy?
So yes, so I definitely recommend these two. So if I go back to my, where is it? Yes, my pure ref. So all these 2D references, I got them from the book Anatomy for Artists, which give you which provide a very good 2D references, like every part, each individual muscle are extremely well detailed. And as more as artists, I definitely recommend June's Anatomy. Tony, I don't remember his name, but he will come back to me in a minute, or as well as the work from Gael Kirschenbaum. Maybe I will drop, I can show you quickly if it's allow me to work. I don't know why this isn't working. Gael Kirschenbaum, but June's Anatomy is for me one of the main reference. His work is really incredible, and it's like a 3D version. So obviously it's like much more easier to understand because you have like the 3D translation. And what's very difficult when it comes to anatomy is like how you translate the 2D from the 2D to the 3D. And I think he's done an amazing job doing that. So I definitely recommend him. And Anatomy for Art, yeah, Anatomy for Sculptors as well, but it's more for human. But the drawings and everything, it's just incredible content.
Right. And Narina is asking, how long did it take to model the whole bison?
So the whole bison, so I think it took me about 2 weeks for the bison, but I was doing the recording because it was part of the tutorial I've made. But yeah, generally a model like this will take me between 1 and 3 weeks, depending how much free time I have, because obviously I do this model during my free time. If I do creatures, it depends a lot. For example, oh, now it's working. For example, this Fringy, it took me about 1 or 2 weeks. Clearpat took me 1 week, but the LF4s took me about 3 months. So it depends, but generally between 2 weeks and 1 month, I would say, in my free time.
Amazing. Just a couple more questions before we move on.
Yes.
Norris is asking, is there a big difference between how you model creatures for films or for games?
Yes, and well, there is like a lot of between movies and games, you said.
Yeah.
Yes, there are, and this is actually my next part, so I'm gonna answer that in a minute.
Okay, great. Great, and then Alessandra, sorry, the questions are flooding in there, is asking, do you give yourself X number of reference for each part of the body, or is it more according to how many good references you find? Does it not become too confusing and distracting having too many references?
Yes, completely, and that's why I always, when it comes to different parts, you can take as many reference as you want, because sometimes it's like each reference are like the utility, but I always try to come back to the key reference, which are in this case these 4, and I always try to stick to it. So even though, for example, when I was doing it, and I show it a lot in my tutorial, I absolutely loved this reference. I keep showing it, but yet I force myself to not to copy it and not to use it. So yes, I would say it's at some point it's not too good to get too many reference, because each time you will kind of get bored of one reference, and then you will find another and you will say, oh, this one is good, and you will start copying this one, and then you will get bored and you will find another one, and it's kind of endless. So that's why I kind of force myself to keep an eye on a main reference I decide at the beginning of my project, and I stick to it until the end.
Great. Thank you. There's a couple of questions, but I'll save them because I think you'll be delving into some of it in the next stage. So
okay, the next stage is going to be workflow mainly, and the difference between what I call a production ready model, so for movies, and more of the model for like kind of a personal project, which are also similar to game because of the optimization.
Okay, great.
So so if I go back for this, I'm gonna switch back to Maya. So yes, so for the software I use for all my professional and personal projects are ZBrush, obviously, Maya, as a render engine I use Arnold, and then for the texturing I use either Substance Painter, Mari, or ZBrush. So in that case, I'm extremely nothing fancy, nothing like I wish I could do like VR, for example, but I'm extremely basic in that matter. And the Bison, when I did the tutorial, I wanted it to be a good case study of a production, what could it be, a production ready asset. So in terms of density, so we have 2 levels of detail. We have what we call the LOD-B and LOD-A. So level of detail B and level of detail A, and it's just one subdivision higher, basically, but it's just the same model. And if you check on this kind of model, you can see on the body, the topology is as squarey and as even as possible. You don't want to put any muscle or anything baked into the topology, because today in the movie industry and in production, we're going to have like muscle simulation, and we're going to have like a lot of skin sliding. So you don't want to have any muscle baked into the topology, because if you do so, then when your topology is moving or sliding, it won't match anymore. You want to have your topology baked into your model for something that is not going to move. Like, for example, if we take the lion I've done for this one, which I also did a LODA, we have for the face, for example, you want to bake obviously the nose, you want to bake the ears, around the eyes, and all the main features. So they have like very prominent upper, like kind of brows. They like do a lot of movement, especially dogs and cats. They do a lot of movement with them. So you kind of want them to be baked into the topology. So when it moves, you have these landmarks that is very useful. Same comes for the inner mouse. So if you select them with the UVs, which are a very interesting part, I'm going to show you in a second, you can see that this is the inner mouse, and everything is baked into it, because this floppy part is going to move, and as it moves, you need to keep the detail, and if you don't have it in the topology, then it gets more difficult. In terms of UV, what you've just saw me do is thanks to my UVs. So if I go and zoom this one a little bit. So normally in a production ready asset, in a big studio like MPC, any like dog or creature will have between 30 and 80 UDIMs or sometimes hundreds. I don't have like the use, I wouldn't have the use of that. So I just stick to 8. But you want your UVs to be extremely clean, so it gets easier for anyone who's going to use the mesh. You want it to be symmetrical left and right. So basically, then if you kind of select UV shell, if you select this part, you can see that except from a tiny bit left here, you can see that it's if it's left part is the bottom area of the UVs, and if I select the right part, then it becomes the top part. They're completely symmetrical, so it gets very easier. For example, I've done a few months ago for texturing XYZ a workflow on my LFO. So on this project, even though it was a personal project, I wanted it to be like a production-ready asset. So I show the UDIM, which are, and the UVs, which are symmetrical and both left and right. And the use of that is then in Mari, you're going to be able to copy and paste very easily what you've done on one side to the other side. And it helps you for a lot of things. For example, if you just do the UVs on one side, then you delete it. If you have to modify something, you just do one sign and you duplicate, you move your UVs, and it's done. And it's very easy. And so for example, for the bison as well, I did 6 UDIMs. For the facial, for example, you want it to be kind of able to select quickly. For example, if I want to do like what we call a facial cutout, so we want to actually I'm gonna do this, is gonna be much easier. What have I done? Okay, sorry, I can't select it, I don't know why. Oops. Okay, I think my my mana crashed. No, not a problem. It's live issue. Okay, is it back? I don't know. I don't know. Come on. It's all right. I'm gonna just open a new one. So one other thing you want to do as well when you're working on a production-ready asset is to work in symmetry. So you wanted to keep it. Whoops, this one is opening again. Okay, so you want to keep it in a neutral pose, and we want, obviously, for when it comes to detailing your mesh, you're gonna have to break the symmetry, but as much as you can, you want to keep the symmetry, except for the big features, like like here on, if you're like a big wrinkle, if it's symmetrical, it's gonna be a bit strange. So some parts, as much as possible, keep it symmetrical, but for the middle part, you need to break it. But basically, the neutral pose. Okay, and this one is back. The neutral pose, it needs to stay in neutral pose. And as well, I mentioned it right before with my LFOs. For the texturing, you will want to use Mari. For this one, I used texturing XYZ. So you want to project all your details. So on this breakdown, I explain everything. So you have like top quality, and you can really zoom into your model. For the bison, I actually didn't use Mari because it was leather, and since it's going to be covered in fur, it didn't make too much sense to go through Mari. But normally, on a project like that, in a production, you will probably. On another hand, you have the more personal type project. So, for example, we have here my last one, which is Fringy. We have here a bit an old one. I don't know if you remember, but it was my Gorion. And then we have as well, where it is. my CLEAPA, which is this one. For this kind of projects, as I take it as personal projects, then here I absolutely don't worry about the workflow, having a lot of UDIMs, doing close-ups and everything. Well, what I'm doing is I'm a concept modeler. I do concept modeling, so I don't care about like getting big detail. I'm just paying attention to getting a nice wrinkle flow, like getting nice vibe with all my references, mixing them together. And that's why for most of my projects, I will get, oh, it doesn't allow me, oh yes. I will get only one UDIM. Only one UDIM, sometimes 4K. So I still do like symmetrical UDIMs, but only on one, and it's only one AK map. And if I don't have enough resolution, well, I try not to worry. For example, on this one, which is, I think I still get, when you go in close up, it doesn't hold as well. This one is crashing as well. So for this one, I also have only one UDIM. I kind of splitted the mesh into 4 different pieces in case I would have wanted to go in higher resolution. But in the end, I just like ended up keeping only one UDIM because it was working pretty well. So if I go back, whoops, I can't see. I can be distracted by this. Sorry. So if for this one, I just got one UDIM. I didn't split my mesh. I didn't project anything into Mari. I just use ZBrush. And if you see the actual mesh, which is, oh, I can move this, which is located here. Up. Yes, it's a bit heavy. I've got like 30 million polygons into that mesh. But when you zoom in it's not crazy. It's a bit messy. But for what I do, it's enough. And what I care most is about the feeling, the anatomy, the transcription of anatomy. As well, when I do this kind of project, I actually do them in pose. At some point, I break the symmetry, and if I need to go back to it, well, that's too bad. And actually, for my which is here, for my Gorion, this is a mesh that I started from without symmetry. So, like you can see, the UVs are really bad. I mean, if you do that in production, that's not good. Even the topology, even symmetrical, is not symmetrical. That's just a Z remesher. So it's like very nasty. So you couldn't animate this. But mine, I use it for a single frame. I knew it wasn't getting animated, so you don't really care. In a production model like the bison, like the lion, for example, it may get animated in the future. So you want to make sure that it holds well and that the topology moves properly. If you go back to the Korean, I'm not sure that this area will react properly once you start to animating it. And for the LFOs, I mentioned a bit earlier that some of my project takes me between 2 weeks and 1 month, and the LFOs took me about 2 or 3 months. It was because as I was doing this breakdown, using Mari is extremely good, is extremely powerful, but it takes a lot of time. And when I'm working on personal projects, I just don't want to spend that much time working on technique. And like having big details isn't what matters the most. It's not why I'm doing this personal project. And I just want to get like a nice vibe, a nice mood. So that's why now I just end up doing all my sculpting and also my texturing into ZBrush. If you look at this one, it has been entirely painted into ZBrush. And even for my roughness map, I always simply do it into ZBrush because it just, like, it's so much simpler. You just, if you move your brush like this, you take like a color and straight away you can start painting. And the good thing is you have your high resolution mesh into your scene. So if we put back the texture for a minute, you can use one very powerful tool, which is on the side locating into masking, and you have the mask by cavity. For example, this mask gonna give you, it's a bit slow, it gives you this fantastic detail map. So you can always take this map, export it into Mari, and then start painting into Mari. Or in Substance, I know you can back everything, but it's just like, like going from one software to another. And what I do is I just untick the view mask, I remove my texture, and then I just start painting. And it's just simple. It's not, no layers, no big software, no big workflow. I keep it simple. And it also teaches you one big thing, which for me was a huge game changer. When I paint into ZBrush, I don't have any layers. I just have a morph target, which doesn't work for the painting mode. So if you go into my layers, I have no layers. And when I'm painting, I'm committing 100% to what I'm doing. It's more difficult. If you're missing something, you have to restart. Obviously, when you're working in a production type asset, you can't allow to do this because you will have like a lot of feedbacks from clients and everything. So you will have to change your model. But when it comes to a personal project, I simply like to go with the flow, as I say, and it forced me to analyze and to commit 100% to what I'm doing. And it helped me, for example, to see if you have like a clear scale, then underneath it needs to be a bit darker. When it's clear scale, underneath darker. Here you have like a darker scale, then underneath it needs to be lighter. Same goes from here. And when you do it that way, you have no choice but to do it. And the good thing is because it's extremely fast, you can restart very quickly. And I think more than anyone, I hate restarting, but unfortunately, this is, you sometimes have to restart. And in fact, when you restart, it's gonna get better. So because this doesn't take too much time, for example, on the LFOs, if I had to change the displays, I will have to go back to Mari, to change in Mari, to export it, re-import it into ZBrush, check. It just takes forever. You don't want to do it. In ZBrush, in 5 minutes, you just change it. And once you get better, then you can do it in Mari, and then you get faster, and you have to do less iteration. So for a training purpose, I would definitely recommend, at least for the painting, or at least start your painting into ZBrush. Don't worry too much about a lot of UDIMs for personal projects. And yeah, just try to catch a vibe and try at some point to break your symmetry. Because if you're modeling in neutral pose and after you're putting in pose without retouching your sculpt, you're gonna feel it. You won't be able to do like the nice wrinkles, the nice small things that are gonna make the difference. And I think, oh yes, and you mentioned, I don't know who asked this question, but I am actually working at Axis Studio for a game. And actually an asset that's going to be used for a game is very similar to the assets that I used. So unfortunately, only one UDIMs. On most of the time, only 4K maps. The difference is that you're going to use, obviously, Substance. And one of the main differences, for example, if you use Unreal, you can apply your material to each individual part, and it won't be dependent to the size or to the number of UDIM you have. So when you're working on a video game asset, for example, if I had one material for the hat, one material for the body, one material for the eye, I will do them in only one UDIM, but each of them will have one UDIM. and then inside Unreal or whatever, Unity or any other software you use, you're gonna be able to apply a material, and it won't be dependent of the number of UV you have. And yes, and last thing, the reason I use as well ZBrush is because I do only skin. I don't do like complex shaders, you know, with art surface shaders. And for this, Substance is fantastic. But for what I do, which is do like just like skin, it's perfect. And I think that's it about for me.
Amazing stuff. Thank you, Nicolas. That was great.
Thank you very much.